Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Jim Carroll.
Here's what's so absolutely fascinating. You know, I go into a lot of organizations and talk about innovation and future trends and what's going on. I'm going in to talk to NASA's Space Center, the people running the Hubble telescope in a month, the people who are driving the Mars Curiosity mission. I had the conference call with them. How can I possibly help in terms of innovation? These are brilliant people. And the answer came back, the business of space is changing. And our people need to comprehend that. So I spend a lot of time talking about future trends. I spend a lot of time talking about innovation. I'm going to talk about something totally different today. I want to talk about the reality of what we've been through when it comes to technology through the last 30 years. I want to talk about what we have gone through when it comes to one of the most unique voyages that any generation in the history of mankind will have gone through. And here's where we're going to start. I'm going to ask a question. And this time it's a show of hands. I want you to look around the room when I do the show of hands, because I want you to see what's going on here. How many of you, the very first computer course you ever took involved learning COBOL, BASIC, or Fortran? Hold up your hands and look around the room. We're hitting 90% here. Folks, we are the only generation in the history of mankind ever met the punch card. Our entire exposure to technology featured the phrase, do not fold, spindle, or mutilate. And we still don't know what spindle means. You know, we are a very unique generation. We all remember our first time. We all remember our first time. Think back to the very first time that you met computer technology. For me, it was 1982. I'd just broken up with my high school sweetheart, needed something to do in my life. The office brought in, during the Man of the Year, when Time named the computer the Man of the Year, they brought in a computer into the office. It was a Radio Shack Model 3. It had a 128K disk drive and 64K of memory. And it came with BASIC. Think back to your first time and what you encountered and what you went through. I actually had a laptop. I had the Radio Shack 100 laptop. I still have it in my basement. I go with my sons to various museums and they have them in there too. I'm feeling kind of old when I walk around. You know, when I got into technology some 35, almost 40 years ago, you know, I started wondering about what was happening to our generation. We went through a very unique period of time in learning COBOL, BASIC, and Fortran. I ended up writing a book called Surviving the Information Age during the 1990s. That took a look at what happened to baby boomers during this unique period of time. Think about what we grew up with. We were watching TV, and we were watching the Jetsons. We were bombarded on a regular basis with stories about the future. You know, we'd watch George Jetson, you know, as he watched these futuristic devices hanging in his room. We'd watch George Jetson interacting with his boss through the Jetsons. And I go back and I remember my first time. You know what my first experience with a computer was? University of Western Ontario, 1967, through a teletype printer playing chess with a computer. I was 8 years old. It was mesmerizing. Think back to what we have witnessed. No other generation in the history of mankind is ever going to go through what we've been through. And I think that makes us powerfully unique. So when I wrote this book, Surviving the Information Age, I went back and I looked at news articles, news headlines from the birth of the computer revolution. And I actually, you know, wanted to pull these into the presentation. So last week I had to fire up a Windows, you know, partition on my Mac computer, and I had to go out and find a version of Lotus Freelance from the 1990s so I could read these slide decks from years ago and look at what we're talking about. You know, when they first started talking about computers in 1946, a 100-ton brain, the Whirlwind 1, the speediest electro brain ever invented. You know, we grew up in a period of time in which they started talking about computers as brains. Machines will do tomorrow's thinking. It was all futuristic. It was all high-tech. And you know what? When you look back now, George Jetson was doing FaceTime. George Jetson was reading news online. The Jetsons were right. We just didn't know it at the time in terms of what was happening. You remember the early days of the computer revolution? There were articles appearing that in the future we would only have to work 1 or 2 days a week because the computers would be doing all the work for us. Reader's Digest and Newsweek actually ran articles about the new leisure lifestyle that would soon be upon us by this miracle of technological change. It's absolutely fascinating to look back. Remember the mainframe? Do you remember the mainframe? Do you remember the era of the mainframe? Do you remember when you were first invited to go into the mainframe room? It was like being invited in by the priesthood, you know, to do something unique. And back in 1971, Reader's Digest was actually writing an article, printed an article that was trying to explain to the human population the mysteries of binary code. It's absolutely bizarre to look back. And you know what happened when computers first arrived in the scene in the business world? It didn't go well. It didn't go well. Computers, you know, were being introduced, business were automating for the very first time. And what began to happen was articles were appearing in the press about people who were receiving utility bills, phone bills, telephone bills that were 7 inches thick and for $7 million. And the person would call the bank, or they would call the computer company, or they would call the phone company, and the response would be, our computers don't make mistakes. It got so out of hand, I found through my research, that back in 1971, Reader's Digest actually printed an article. What to do if a computer fouls up your credit charge account. Think about what we went through. Think about the most fascinating ride. We went through a period of time of absolutely stunningly bad predictions. You know, when telephones first came out, it was actually forecasted that it would be impossible for everybody in the United States to have a telephone because there weren't enough young ladies aged 15 to 22 to take care of the switchboards. Man, I don't even think they were thinking about sexism back at this point in time. Computers in the future may one day weigh no more than 1.5 tons. Man, can you imagine carrying around your iPhone if it's, 1.5 tons in weight? There is practically no chance that computers, communication space satellites will be used to provide better telephone, telegraph, and other services. It's virtually impossible. We went through stunningly bad predictions. The head of IBM predicted at one point there might be a worldwide market of perhaps 5 computers. I've traveled the length and breadth of this country. I've talked to the greatest minds and the best people, and I am convinced that data processing is a fad that will not last through the year. It's an amazing voyage we've been through. There is no reason why anyone would ever want a computer in their home. That was the head of digital equipment in 1977. Whatever happens to these companies? And it's kind of fascinating when you look at that picture. There's my young sons, 15 years ago, sitting down at the home PC. 640K should be enough for everybody. This is Bill Gates, for crying out loud. It's fascinating to think about what we go through. And even when the internet first appeared, one of the founders of the internet predicted that we are going to see a catastrophic supernova and a massive catastrophic collapse of the internet. Just in 1995. What we have been through is some absolutely bizarre behavior as we have tried to adapt to the technology which has invaded our lives. There were a lot of stories that I wrote into the book about what happened to some of us as we tried to deal with the complexities of all this technology. There was the story of the secretary who was assigned responsibility for making a copy of the computer disks each night. And one day the company had a catastrophic server failure, and they asked her to go back and get the copies of the computer disks so they could do a restore. And she came walking in with a stack of 8.5, 11 pages of paper, each one with an accurate photocopy of the particular disk. We don't know if it's true. It could have happened. Dell put out a story in the mid-1990s, of one of their service calls that came in. And the lady called in, and she said, my coffee cup holder is broken. Ma'am, what are you trying to say? We're Dell Computers. We sell computers. She says, I know, and my coffee cup holder is broken, and I'd like to get it replaced. The guy tried to spend 5 minutes trying to figure out with her what the heck was going on. He finally realized what she was doing. She'd come into the office in the morning. She'd have her cup of coffee. She'd walk up to her computer. She'd press the button for the CD-ROM tray. It would slide out, and she'd put her cup of coffee on top of it. The darn thing finally broke off. When I was researching this book, I found absolutely magical stories of what happens when technology goes wrong. There was a guy in Oregon, true story, he wanted a custom license plate. And he got the form to get the custom license plate. There's 3 areas you fill on the form. You get 3 possible choices. He was a sailing enthusiast, so he wrote in yachting. He wrote in sailing. He couldn't think of a 3rd option, so he wrote in no plate. He sent in the form. 2 weeks later, he received in the mail his custom license plate. What did it read? No plate. Option 1 wasn't available. Option 2 wasn't available. It went into the computer processing department. The computer logic just processed it and assigned him the license plate, no plate. He sort of figured out what was going on, thought it'd be unique, good party discussion, so he put it on his car. He started driving around. In a week, he got a summons from the Transportation Administration for the state with a ticket. Reason for infraction: driving without a properly authorized license plate. The next day he got 2 more. Within a week he was receiving hundreds. And he was calling them trying to figure out, why am I getting all these tickets? They finally figured out that what was happening was an officer would find an abandoned vehicle and would write in the reason for the infraction: no plate. Computers only do what you tell them to do. He's the guy who owns no plate, send it to him. You know, it's been an absolutely fascinating time in terms of the unreliability of technology along the way. The blue screen of death, right? You think about some of the error messages we get by using this stuff. Macromedia Dreamweaver with an error message: no error occurred. What the heck do I do? Do I press OK? Do I not press OK? You're freaking me out here. You know, what's happening here? You've really screwed up this time. I know, what else is new? It's my first day. You know, and sometimes we're using these things and we're just absolutely feeling like, go away. We are a very unique generation in the history of mankind who have gone through the most unique voyage in history that will never happen again. And one fellow observed if the automobile had followed the same development cycle as the computer, a Rolls-Royce today would cost $100, get 1,000,000 miles to the gallon, and it would blow up once a year, killing everybody inside. It's kind of worrisome. Microsoft says they're going to build, the stuff for the next version of the car, and somebody observed, well, if that's going to happen, you're going to drive down the highway. One day the car is just going to stop in the middle of the road, and the dash is going to have one light that says "General Car Fault." The result of all this is, I think we are a very unique generation. We are the only generation who have met the punch card. I have a 17-year-old son and a 19-year-old son. They've never known a world that does not have the internet. They've never known a world through the last 10 or 15 years in which they have not had a mobile device available to them. They've never known a world in which they have not had the encyclopedia of human knowledge at their fingertips. Our great-grandparents never had to deal with this stuff. And we're the only generation who went through this transitional period of time over the last 30 to 40 years that has saw the arrival of all kinds of fascinating new technology into the workplace. And you know what it has done to us? It has completely freaked us out. Ogden Nash made the observation for a lot of folks, progress is great, but it's gone on way too long. And I think some of us feel like that sometimes. We're in this whirlwind of massive change, trends which are accelerating. So much happening at a blinding speed. And sometimes we sit back and we think about what we've been through and the challenges we faced, and we're just kind of like, slow it down. The thing is, it's not going to. And you know what? This is causing a lot of challenge in the workplace. I was speaking at an auto dealer conference a few weeks ago, and I observed, it's such a challenge for some folks. The typical auto dealer today, 1 in 3, does not feel comfortable selling cars, because they can't deal with the GPS gear. They don't understand the Bluetooth. They don't understand all the MP3 technology and the new navigation systems. It's become far too complex. And maybe we need to think about this a little bit more, that we are different. We need to be patient with each other as this rush of technology and progress continues to march forward. But a lot of us, simply have a very difficult time dealing with the constant bombardment of new technology. Years ago I found this little video that appeared on the internet. I'm sure you've seen it, but it bears repeating to watch it again. And look at that. I got an update happening in the middle of the screen. What are the chances of that? before. It's absolutely fabulous because he's whacking the heck out of the thing. But how many of us ever felt like this? You know, going through some of the things that we've gone through and, you know, absolutely feeling rage, you know, at the technology which has become a part of our lives. And you know what? It has happened. You know, I actually found a story that ran in a paper one day that reported on a fellow that had a fight with his computer, and it was such an extreme case they had to call in a SWAT team. Turned out the man was simply upset at his computer, which he used with the negative name, and he wanted to kill it. They called in a SWAT team to help him deal with his issues. But we live in an extraordinary period of time. We live in the middle of this generational transformation, you know, in which we've been through this remarkable experience in terms of what has happened with technology, and now we have the next generation. Here's a little cartoon that puts in perspective the reality in which we find ourselves today. Here's a kid helping his father install some software. Okay, Dad, you've loaded the disk. What you got to do is you got to transfer the file to here. Double-click to open it, Dad. So, you know, the child's being very patient with his father, walking him through step by step how to install a piece of software, because his father is one of these baby boomers who's been through this unique voyage with technology through the years. And the last frame really captures the essence of the unique period of time in which we find ourselves today. See, Dad, that's how you install an internet porn filter. Think about it. You know, this is extraordinary stuff. You know, it's an absolutely extraordinary thing to think about the voyage that we've been through, that nobody will ever go through before. And you know what I think it has done? I think it has changed our approach to innovation and future trends and creativity. I think it holds us back a little. I think it makes us a little bit different. Einstein observed, if you keep doing the same thing over and over and over again and expect a different result each time, that's how we define insanity. What do we run in organizations to help baby boomers deal with our unique relationship with technology? We run change management workshops. I used to do change management workshops. I stopped doing them one day when a 25-year-old came up to me and said, I don't get it, just change already. And I think what is happening is this next generation, who's never gone through any of the unique period of time that we've gone through with technology, is fundamentally different. They think different, they're wired differently, their brains work differently. They're very different when it comes to creativity and innovation and looking at the world in a new and different way. Do you know right now half of the global population is under the age of 25? And what is happening is they're coming into the workforce, they're globally wired, they're entrepreneurial, they're collaborative. You know, we talk about the need to build collaboration capabilities within organizations. You know, and they look at that and go, huh? Like, just collaborate already. And what is happening is they're coming into the workplace, they're coming into the workforce, they're coming into leadership positions. And what is beginning to happen is they're driving rapid business model change because they think and act differently in terms of how quickly the world can change. Which brings me to my sons. You know, Willie and Thomas are now 17 and 19. I've had the remarkable opportunity of working in a home office for the last 20 years. And so they would get up in the morning and come down to the home office, you know, and we'd spend some time together, you know, before they would go off to school. We always had a problem on Take Your Kid to Work Day. You know, the last time Thomas stayed for Take Your Kid to Work Day, he came to the gym with me, and then I had a conference call, so we went upstairs and watched TV. But you know what I learned by spending so much time with them? What I learned is something that we are going through, our generation, is we are living in a period of time in which things that are a part of our life is becoming stuff from the olden days, and it's happening before our very eyes. I first started to clue into this one day when I was cleaning out the beer fridge in the home office, and Thomas came down to the office. He's about 5 years old. You gotta have a beer fridge in the home office. And, you know, there's a 35-millimeter canister of film there in a box, yellow Kodak box. And he says to me, what's that, Dad? And I said, well, it's film. Nah. Because in his mind already, I'm an early adopter. I've had a digital camera since they've been out. And in his mind, it's the little flash memory card. That's film. I said, no, it's film, Thomas. I'll show you how it works. And I had to go dig out my 35-millimeter camera. You know, and I showed him we were going to spool the film inside. And, you know, stand there, I'm going to take a picture of you. So he went over there. I took a picture of him. Click. What do you think he did? He ran around to the back of the camera to see the picture. He wanted to see the picture right away. And I said, it doesn't work like that, Thomas. Look, we're going to have to take 23 more pictures. Then we got to drive down to see the man by the candy store. And we got to wait an hour, so maybe we can get an ice cream. And he goes walking out of the office, and his older brother, 7 years old, says, what were you doing with Dad? His dad was showing me something from the olden days. Click. Right? And that really made me think, because here's something that was a part of my life until recently. And all of a sudden, to my son, to this next generation, it is something from the olden days. You know, a few weeks later, I get up on a Saturday morning. What are we doing, you know, when we're kids Saturday mornings? It's cartoon time. It's the one time when mom and dad will let you get up, you know, and you go down and you watch cartoons for several hours. I get up one morning, I go down, Willie's on the couch, and he's looking kind of grumpy. And I said, Willie, what's wrong? And he looks at me, there's no data, Daddy. I said, what? He said, there's no data, Daddy. He said, look, and he took the digital remote control. You know, the electronic program guide. The grid that comes up that shows you what's on every single channel. There must have been some type of system glitch the night before in the cable network, because all the little boxes read, no data. He did not know what to do to find a show to watch. Seriously. He did not know what to do. So I went to the front door, I got the Saturday morning paper, I dug out the TV guide, and I came marching in and said, I'll show you how we did it in the olden days. Him and Thomas are going through this thing. Wow, people really use this? The list kept getting longer and longer. Cleaning out the basement one day, we found an 8-track tape player. We found a Sony Walkman. They found my LP records. They found my CDs. You know, and all of these things have become to them things from the olden days, just like that. You know, we're a skiing family. We were out skiing out Western Canada one time. And, you know, when we were done at the end of the day, we went to a local grocery store. The lady in the line in front of us went to pay for her groceries with a check. And Thomas said, what's she doing, Dad? I said, well, she's writing a check. What's that? I said, well, you know, she writes her name on it, she signs it and writes in an amount of money and the name of the store, and that lets her pay for this stuff. And he goes, you mean I could take a piece of paper to the candy store and give it to the guy? And it was fascinating. But again, to him, it was something from the olden days. Checks have disappeared. When have we ever lived in a period of time in which stuff which has been a part of our lives is disappearing at such a rapid rate? You know, I had a Jeep at one point in time, four-wheel drive, stick shift, manual, you know, and I'm driving along. And, you know, Thomas says to me from the back seat at one point in time, you know, Daddy, why don't you drive with that joystick? Think about it. Their entire perception of the world is different. You couldn't imagine the day we had the conversation about what we did in the world before we had TV remote controls. You actually got up off the couch, you walked over to the TV, you pressed some buttons, and you changed the channel. Think about the rapidity of change in terms of how quickly this is happening. This computer is very fast, became outdated faster than any other computer I've ever owned. And I think that's part of the challenge we're dealing with as we go forward into the future. Because the future is accelerating. Things are speeding up, and this generation is fundamentally different. I just realized, you know, I was in second grade when you started working here. We have in the workforce now this unique generational clash between two generations, which will never again be repeated in terms of what we've gone through and in terms of their uniqueness in having grown up with technology since birth. And so we have a lot of really unique workplace turmoil that is happening out there. So here's the thing, you know what I really think it comes down to is we are unique, but we have to learn to live with velocity. A world of accelerating change. You know that Apple is in the situation where 60% of their revenues comes from products that didn't exist 4 years ago. Could you do that in your line of business? Could you reinvent yourself at such a pace that 4 years from now, 60% of your revenue is going to come from sources of revenue or methodologies of reaching out to the next generation home purchaser that don't exist today? Can you challenge yourself to keep up with the speed of change which envelops and surrounds us today? What was really big just 5 years ago? Or what was, things that didn't exist 10 years ago? 10 years ago, we didn't have Facebook, we didn't have Twitter, we didn't have iPods and iPhones and iPads, we didn't have YouTube, we didn't have Google Maps, and we didn't have all these weird acronyms, that we've had to work to struggle to figure out, or we've had to go to a website to look them up to see what they mean. What was really big just 5 years ago? Just 5 years ago, Research Motion BlackBerry was a really cool brand. Look how quickly things change around us. Just 5 years ago, Facebook was a place where teenagers hung out. And now they're freaked out because all the parents are starting to get Facebook accounts. They're going, I got to get out of here and get into Snapchat because, these people having them around, it's freaking me out. Tourists carried around digital cameras. You notice we're not even doing that anymore because we're all using our iPhones, our smartphones, our Android devices to take pictures. Tweeting was something that birds did. And it's fascinating to think about what could be really big just 5 years from now. In this very room, on this very stage, was where I did my keynote for Campgrounds of America last November. And I was flying down here today and I was trying to think, how can we put in perspective just how quickly our world is changing? And so I thought I'd talk to you for a moment about what I talked to them about. What I talked to them about was the tent of the future. Where's camping going to take us in the 21st century? Well, the tent of the future is going to have vertical wind turbines that catch wind and convert it into power. The tent of the future is going to have solar panels that harness sunlight and turn it into electricity. The tent of the future is going to have solar-powered baseball caps with built-in torches for nighttime reading. The stuff is real. It's being developed now. A portable battery charger that campers can use to charge gadgets and devices. And here I've got a whole room full of folks for KOA, Campgrounds of America, very down-to-earth people who are running campgrounds and trying to keep up with the change that is occurring with their customer. An intelligent sleeping bag that regulates body temperature. This isn't science fiction. This is just like the Jetsons. There are people who are redefining the future of the outdoor hospitality experience today. And then there's the challenge that they're faced with. We can sit back and react, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard. And that's what we do when we hear about the future. The thing about the challenge that an organization like KOA, Campgrounds of America, is faced with. 36% of young people under the age of 18 won't camp because they can't charge their gadgets. Fascinating to think about. 28% because they can't watch television. 22% worry about the lack of a mobile phone signal. 16% because they won't be able to use their portable hairstyling appliances. So we still live in this unique period of time with significant challenges. 47% would enjoy camping more if they had a charging point for their gadgets. And we live in an absolutely fascinating period of time, and I think it's up to us to ensure that we can continue on the voyage and do what needs to be done. We can't react to future trends. We can't react to the fact that what we were watching on TV 40 years ago with the Jetsons has become real. We can't react with a phrase such as, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard. When I was talking to the camper, 10 years ago, they were dealing for the very first time with the issue of people starting to arrive in their sites with cell phones and Wi-Fi devices. And now it's absolutely critical to their survival. Part of the challenge is we all have to keep up. Part of the challenge you have as mortgage originators is you have to ensure you have the infrastructure that keeps up with the expectations of today's modern consumer, that keeps up with how quickly our world is going to change. What could be really big 5 years from now? I spoke at this auto conference a few weeks ago, and just think about what's going to happen with the automobile. We could be in a situation by 2017, every single car we drive has a Siri button, where Apple has done a deal and we're talking to the car. We're interacting with the car with Siri, which is found on an iPhone. Augmented reality screens with heads-up displays. As we're driving around with 3D, glasses-free dashboards. Interactive in-car billboards. I'm looking at a real estate site. Take me there. and it begins to put up mapping technology on the inside of the car, on the virtual heads-up display. And I'm a smart mortgage originator because I'm the one that cut the deal to work with that organization to be inside that car. Because there's going to be open platforms for extensibility and customization of the inboard dash. And not only that, all these cars are driving themselves. Science fiction, George Jetson? I don't think so. I think we'll be there by 2017, if not sooner. And here's where you need to challenge yourself in innovation, thinking about the future, reconciling that you and I do come from a unique period of time that we will never see again. You know, you're going to talk a lot about innovation. I talk a lot to my clients about innovation, and what we talk about is the need for an accelerated innovation cycle. You know, getting better at the rapid ingestion of new technologies and methodologies, focusing on time to market, you know, rapidly refocusing our resources to deal with new opportunities or new threats, a rabid focus on operational excellence. You know, this is what world-class innovators are doing, a rapid response to volatility. It's part of everything you've figured out through the last several years, and a mindset to deal with high-velocity change. But here's the challenge. Because of who we are, because we are the only generation who grew up learning COBOL, BASIC, and Fortran, and who met the punch card, and who became very unique as a result, some of us are helping to put in place in our organizations an organizational sclerosis that is clogging up our ability to innovate, change, and adapt. What I've come to realize in a lot of organizations is that there are people who wake up in the morning and the very first thought that comes to their mind is, what am I going to do today to kill great ideas? Seriously, this is what they do. You know how I know this is true? Because I know the code words and phrases that they use, that they bring into meetings when somebody is trying to invoke and cause some change. When somebody is trying to innovate, when somebody is trying to continue to move the organization forward, not back. And there's that phrase, the worst phrase in American business today. We can't do that because we've always done it this way. Do you ever hear that phrase? Do you ever have a meeting, somebody comes up with a great idea, and somebody comes in and says, well, it won't work? Do you ever have a situation, somebody suggests a great idea, and somebody says, I don't think we can? Or somebody responds that it's too risky. Or somebody responds that, why can't we just keep doing what we've been doing all along? Or worse yet, they suggest, I'm not convinced it's necessary. You're going to talk a lot about change. You're going to talk a lot about future trends. You're going to talk a lot about what's going on in the industry. The financial consumer of tomorrow. My sons, who are 17 and 19, are going to be starting to enter their prime earning years. They are going to buy a house one day. They are going to need a mortgage. They are not going to interact in the same old way. They're going to have different expectations, different needs, different wants, different means of support, using technologies that might not even yet exist. We need to have an open mind. And so as you go forward in the next several days and focus on what you can do to ensure you get ahead, I want to leave you with 10 words. 10 words that should help you think about what we've been through and where we're going. Number one is observe. Isn't it kind of fun to look back, at just some of the things that we've been through? And think about what it means when we are such a unique period, generation in a period of time. And think about what we need to change. Have we become a little bit too resistant to change? Do we change fast enough? Can we change as fast as the next generation who've been weaned on technology since birth? And where do we need to take some risks? Where do we need to try to do some things we haven't done before? Where we're holding ourselves back because we're fearful of risk? It's only by trying to do things we haven't done before that we can really get ahead in a fast-paced future. Where do we need to banish? Where do we need to banish those innovation killer phrases that I just went through that provide this organizational sclerosis that clogs up our ability to try to do new things? Where do we need to try? I think a lot of us hold ourselves back from trying to do everything we can with a fast-paced future because of the historical accident in which we find ourselves. And so where do we need to question the assumptions and the habits and the routines that we have fallen into by going through the most unique period of time that saw the arrival of technology into the workplace at a time when it was not mature, at a time when it was still maturing, and a time in which it was accelerating? Where do we need to grow? Where do we need to focus on opportunity? What do I need to do as an individual to ensure I can thrive and take advantage of the opportunities that the digital age will continue to present? Some people see a trend and see a threat. Real innovators see a trend and see an opportunity. Real innovators do. You do those 9 things, you get to the 10th most important word of all of innovation, and that's enjoy. Thank you very much. Have a great conference.